So, today, in part two of What the Prosecution Didn't Tell You in the Delphi case, we are going to talk about the Franks. Now, the Franks is not a family in Indiana. No. It is a motion that was denied 4 times. And most likely, if it had ever been able to be presented in court, it would have changed the course of the trial and history as we know it. Well, hello, my silky friends. Yes, we are going to talk about the Franks motion, and it's very lengthy, so I'm going to condense this, but know that I am going to refer to the Franks over and over in different episodes, so you need to know what it is and why it is so important that this trial should have never happened. So, for those of you who don't know, what is a Franks motion? Well, this all came from a court case, Franks versus Delaware. And basically, in that case, they had to throw out the conviction because they found that the police had done a really bad job in getting the probable cause and searching his house to begin with. Because that was all flawed, they had to throw out the case. It was a big deal. It went to the Supreme Court. Yeah, Franks was guilty? Most likely. We'll never know. It is also referred to sometimes by the fruit of the poison tree. Okay, basically, you got a bad tree, you got rotten fruit, you can't eat any of it, right? Legally speaking, the Franks motion is a legal motion filed by the defendant requesting a hearing to challenge the validity of a search warrant based on allegations of false statements or omissions. In other words, the police either just flat out lied or they just didn't tell the whole truth. You know what I mean? Now, if the defendant can prove that law enforcement intentionally or recklessly included false information, then the court can suppress evidence that was a result of an invalid search warrant or whatever the information was, okay? So, in other words, law enforcement did not provide a truthful and complete picture to the judge who issued the warrant. Okay, are we all together now? You had the original Franks motion, which, wow, when it came out, those of us who were deep diving in the case, it was 139 pages long of boom, boom, boom information. Oh my God. Now, this opened a bigger can of worms than anyone could have imagined, and it sounded like almost unbelievable that such things could be going on. Now, it caused such a fuss that basically, instead of, now this is a motion, okay, the defense puts up to the judge and says, here, we need to have a hearing on this way before trial. And the judge, instead of even ruling on whether that she would accept it or deny it, she kicked both attorneys off the case. Yeah, well, that's one way to solve the problem, isn't it? That was such a big ordeal that whole brouhaha went up to the state Supreme Court in Indiana, who ruled that the judge could not throw the attorneys off the case. So, the first Franks motion was pretty much dead in the water because the attorneys were gone. But then when they were reinstated, they had to do a second Franks motion. Now, a lot of people thought, this is so fanciful. This is just the defense creating this fairy tale of what happened because they're trying to save their client, Richard Allen, which is, of course, their job. Oh, but no, that is not what a Franks motion is. A Franks motion is based on solid evidence. Did you hear me? It's not a theory from the defense. As a matter of fact, this Franks motion was not only taken from statements by the sheriff of Carroll County and some of the lead investigators, but it was also added to by real investigators, including the FBI, who had a whole other case scenario of what happened and very, very good persons of interest, possible perpetrators. That's hard to say. Possible, whatever. So again, when I am talking about the Franks motion, it is not just a bedtime story, okay? It is real evidence by real investigators. So now let's move on to the third Franks motion. Now, when it comes to the first two motions, Judge Gall, she just denied it. Deny. She's the Queen of denial. I don't know. Okay, just scrap that. I don't know. I don't know what I'm doing here. But I do know what I'm talking about, and that is the third time they brought the Franks. Now, this one was a little bit different because it was prompted by evidence received from the prosecution on March 13th, 2024. This newly disclosed evidence, which the defense argued should have been included in the original search warrant, that was back in 2022, included these things. Like we talked about, the presence of at least 3 cell phones in the area of the crime scene at the time of the unalivings. None of these phones belonged to Richard Allen, suggesting the possibility of other individuals being present during the crime. Well, that seems pretty important, but we already talked about that, so let's go on. It also included some testimony of Purdue professor Jeffrey Turco's report, which was provided to Unified Command. Turco stated that the configuration of the branches found on the girls' bodies could plausibly be an inscription inspired by Norse runes or their modern recreations. Okay, so basically they added these things in there and they're like, okay, so you don't want to listen to the whole 139-page Frank's motion that we did. Here's a smaller one. These are the issues, and these are real issues, especially the geofencing. So, what did Judge Gold do? Denied. No reason given. Just, nah. I don't think so. Not today. Of course, the prosecution, this was a huge victory. They don't want this evidence in because it exonerates Richard Allen. So let's move to the 4th Franks. Yeah, 4. I'm running out of fingers here. They allege that attorney Nicholas McClelland and law enforcement, specifically Carroll County Sheriff Tony Liggett, had concealed and misrepresented evidence in the search warrant application for Allen's residence. Again, we're back to the same thing. This whole probable cause affidavit, and we're going to look at that, like it was a bunch of hooey. So, therefore, just like Franks versus Delaware, this should not be in evidence. As a matter of fact, you need to just throw the whole thing out. And the defense moved that the warrant was illegally obtained. Now, that sounds pretty serious. The 4th Franks motion was specifically prompted by new evidence disclosed by the prosecution on April 26, 2024, as a result of the defense motion to compel and motion for sanctions filed on April 23rd, 2024. This evidence was, number 1, records of a conversation between Sergeant Mitch Blocker, we talked about him a little bit, an unidentified individual appearing to have taken place before 1 a.m. on February 14th, 2017. The content of the conversation is not specified in the document, but the defense implies its significance in relation to their arguments for a Franks hearing. Now, we didn't hear from Mitch Blocker, did we? We don't know. That name is not familiar to us. Yeah, there's reasons for that. We'll talk about that later. But Mitch was very, very important to the defense, as stated in this motion. Now, on top of the original geofencing and cell phone data, we had additional information that showed that pings were sent to Libby's phone every 15 minutes on February 13th, 2017. Now, prior to this, the defense only knew of 2 pings, but now they find out it's pinging every 15 minutes. What the heck? And so they argued that the prosecution's withholding of this information hindered their ability to accurately construct a timeline of events. Did you know? Really, the timeline kind of was started by a creator called Gray Hughes who worked it out with Kelsey on his channel. You can go watch it. Yeah, crazy. It wasn't even the police. It was, they're getting together and they're putting together a timeline because nobody had one. Is that how y'all do things in Indiana? I don't know. Now, the defense said that this information, along with the original information, should have demonstrated a pattern of misconduct by law enforcement. Well, nobody wants to hear that. Oh, no. We have already invested way too much money. There is going to be a trial. It doesn't matter if it's the truth or not, right? Well, apparently, it would seem, in my opinion, this is what Gull thinks. Judge Gull, not the bird. The defense also said that had all of the relevant information been included in the search warrant application, the application would have been denied. And I agree, it would have been denied. And why do I think that? Well, not only when we look more into the Frank's motion, the actual details, you will see that a lot of stuff contradicts itself, statements, lies, all kind of craziness. But the one thing that makes me think this is when they went for that search warrant in the beginning for Richard Allen, they had all of these things in the probable cause affidavit. The reason we're going to go. We have probable cause to think that Richard Allen is guilty. So we're going to go search him. And you have to have a judge sign off on that. Well, as we found out, it was a lot of smoke and mirrors. And Judge Diener, the one that signed that affidavit, the probable cause, he recused himself literally just a few days later, saying, oh, he felt unsafe. Well, buddy, you knew that when you signed the document. You knew what was going to happen. So why did you sign it and then recuse yourself? Or did you realize after you looked into it that it was all a bunch of horse pucky? That's what I think. Anyway, that's the Frank's motion, and that was a little bit longer, but very, very important for you to understand when we refer to it back and forth. All right, I will see you next time. Have a cup of tea. Calm down. I'm talking to myself. Whatever you do, stay silky. Bye-bye.